Thank you very much. Thank you, Senators, for having me here today. Our coalition's focus is on the impacts of national security and anti-terrorism laws in Canada and our country's role and actions throughout the so-called war on terror, on civil liberties and fundamental freedoms guaranteed by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and international human rights agreements. Through our work, we have observed the constant and undeniable problem of racial, religious, and political profiling, abetted by the vague and overreaching definitions of terrorism and national security found in Canada's laws and policies. The most pervasive of this profiling has been the targeting of Muslims, Arabs, and those perceived to be Muslim or Arab as the leading threat to the security of Canadians, despite evidence to the contrary. This systemic Islamophobia has a tangible negative impact on Muslims not just in Canada, but around the world. When thinking of this impact, we believe it is important that we remember the victims and survivors of these laws and listen to their words. Those who have directly experienced the most drastic forms of rights violations must be included in our policy discussions if we hope to truly address these problems. I want to share some of the words of Mohamedou Ould Slahi, who was renditioned from his home in Mauritania and eventually imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay prison for 14 years, where he faced horrific acts of mistreatment and torture. All of this was based on faulty intelligence provided to the United States by Canadian intelligence agencies. Last May, Mr. Slahi told reporters with the Middle East Eye, and I quote, "I want Canada to tell the world this was a mistake. I want to clear my name. This is very important to me. Without the Canadian government, I would never have been kidnapped. Without the Canadian government, I would never have been selected for the torture program. Instead of the protection I was seeking, I was literally thrown under the bus. I just wanted an apology, and I want them to give me back my papers that they took away because I need a life, because my country won't give me a passport. I want to be able to go to Canada freely and meet my readers and meet my supporters and do my talks in cities in Canada because I love the Canadian people." Unquote. Canada has ignored his request for an apology, forcing Mr. Slahi to pursue justice the only way he can, through the courts. His is just one tragic and enraging case among many. Others who have also faced mistreatment or torture, either at the hands or with the complicity of Canada in the name of counterterrorism, include Maher Arar, Abdul al-Maki, Ahmed al-Mati, Moya Nuruddin, Omar Kader, Mohammed Harkat, Hassan Diab, Abufstian al-Razik, Benamar Bada, and more. It is no coincidence that all of these are Muslim men. Over the past 2 decades, studies have repeatedly documented the disproportionate impact of national security measures on Muslims in Canada. For example, a 2019 study found that 98% of individuals prosecuted under Criminal Code anti-terrorism provisions have been Muslims or linked to Muslim groups. The vast majority of these cases did not involve any executed act of violence, whereas most white perpetrators of actual mass violence have not been persecuted or prosecuted, rather, as terrorists. Our own research has shown the disproportionate, unsupported, and prejudiced targeting of Muslim charities by the CRA under the guise of countering terrorist financing. Other examples include discrimination and profiling in immigration, racial profiling at the border while traveling, including via the Passenger Protect program or no-fly list, information sharing with rights-violating regimes, and the harassment of Muslims at work, on campus, and in their places of worship. In recent years, laws like the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2015 and the National Security Act of 2017 have expanded national security powers without adequate rights protections, transparency, and oversight, and have not gone far enough to address the profiling and systemic discrimination faced by Muslims in Canada. If the federal government truly wishes to address Islamophobia, it must forego policies that are predicated on the vague and politically malleable idea of terrorism. Instead, what is needed is legislative reform, real accountability, and justice for the survivors of rights violations in the name of counterterrorism. This includes, and I have 5 specific points. First, rescinding rights-violating anti-terrorism laws, including CISA's threat disruption powers. Second, increase resources for and augment the powers of review and oversight committees, agencies, including independent review for the CBSA. Third, establishing clear accountability mechanisms, including to address CSIS breaches of duty of candor. Fourth, mandate the collection of disaggregated race and religion-based data to inform policy. And 5, to end the prejudice audits of Muslim charities under the guise of combating terrorist financing in the charitable sector. I have 6. And sixth, to re-examine the resources granted to national security agencies with a goal of reallocating resources towards solutions that promote mental and physical health and well-being and combat exclusion, prejudices, discrimination, and poverty. Finally, as I mentioned, it is key that there is justice for the victims of counterterrorism abuses. Taking those steps would show a concrete change in approach and undermine the pervasive, unfounded image of Muslims posing a threat to the security of Canada. Some examples of this include, but are not limited to, immediately repatriating all Canadians currently detained in northeastern Syria, lifting Mohammed Harkat's security certificate and ending his deportation proceedings, calling on the French government to end all proceedings against Dr. Hassan Diab and committing to no new extradition, resolving the cases of both Mohamedou Oudslahi, who I mentioned earlier, as well as Abu Sufyan Abdelrazik, and issuing apologies to both for his mistreatment with the complicity of the Canadian government. And finally, to request a transfer of Abdulrahman El Banasawi from U.S. prison to Canada, where he could at a minimum be supported by his family, community, and receive mental health services. I'd be happy to expand on any of those cases during the question period. Thank you very much for your time.